Hey everybody, and welcome to The Intersection, a podcast that takes a real look at how race and relationships intersect. Join us as we look at how we can set our eyes on the life of Christ as a source of compassion for each of our relationships. Our hosts include Pastor Jeff Bogue, Senior Pastor at Grace Church of Greater Akron, Bishop Joey Johnson, Senior Pastor at the House of the Lord, and Pastor Coach Kemp Boyd, Pastor and Executive Director for Love Akron. Keep listening as we cross paths on today's episode of The Intersection.
Well, hello, and welcome to the very first episode of the Intersection podcast for 2024. And as usual, I have the opportunity to serve and to be flanked by Bishop Joey Johnson, Pastor Jeff Bogue, and Dr. Daniel Hawk. Good and happy New Year, everyone. How's everything going?
So far, 2 days in, pretty good.
There we go. Hey, success. That's what we want. We have high expectations. So everything is going really well, really good. And so excited to be with you all again. Again, we're here on the intersection where we believe that Jesus intersects in all aspects of our life, but also we're here to discuss how we can intersect with each other a little bit better as the Big C Church, as we continue to move forward and do the reconciling work of Jesus Christ here on earth. So today is a very special episode to where we're going to talk about and discuss a little bit of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. We know that his day is coming up here on January the 15th, and we wanted to take a time and just kind of use one of these episodes just to kind of talk about him, how he intersected and how he brought in the gospel to his work and the work that continues on today. And so I'm really excited to be able to do that. And as we do that, let's just show a video. There's something that came out last year that was entitled Share the Dream Bible Study. And it was based on Dr. King's kind of 6 principles that he really believed in and thought about. So we're going to watch just a short clip of that now, and then we're going to get into our discussion.
Welcome to Share the Dream, a video study series based on the teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Throughout this video series, we will be looking at principles based on the life and teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that are rooted in 6 qualities.
It is a reciprocal love. We love because we are loved.
It was pretty clear that if he gave his life, he wanted it to be for ordinary people.
I look at him and I think, I must dare to be great.
Faith and love go hand in hand. So what are you going to do?
He still had this prevailing spirit of optimism.
When you find what it is that God wants you to give your life for, then you have a meaningful life.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream.
As we look at some of that, I want to lean into some discussions first as we look at those 6 qualities. Some that we've talked about at length here, even on this podcast. Just want to kind of go around, first of all, to start with saying, when you think about Dr. King, the work that was done, do you see that work continuing now in the 6 qualities that was mentioned in the video? And I'm going to throw that out there to anybody who wants to jump in first.
I'll start. I think that one of the things that kind of bothers me about when we start to talk about Dr. King is that his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech is the basically the only thing that most people know. They've heard it over and over. It's been soundbited and whatever else and played and streamed. And so that's the only thing he ever said. And so one year I just went back and just started to do some reading. I read about 3,000 pages of material on King, because there is lots that he did and said beyond the "I Have a Dream" speech. And one of his big things was the beloved community. And so in the beloved community, we start to see some of those characteristics come out, which are very important, very powerful. He lived them out. We should talk also about the underside of those people who, what the FBI did and all those other kind of things that kind of tarnish what he was about and what he did. But in the final analysis, God used him, I think, in a way to highlight justice as he's not used anybody else in his time. And so I think there's a lot to talk about, a lot to try to touch on, but I think it's, do I see it going on today? I think people have lost. I don't think we even know who Dr. King is, the newer generation. And so this is a great time to kind of reintroduce, talk about all of that.
Thank you, Bishop. Pastor Jeff, Dr. Hawk.
Well, one of the things I was struck with and am struck with is the power of Dr. King drawing forth on that Christian element of hope. I mean, and that comes directly from, I think, the Christian tradition. In the midst of a darkness, in the midst of turbulence and chaos and injustice, there is a hope. We Christians are the people who believe, who are oriented toward hope. And I raise that just as a prominent part of Dr. King's message that really affects me. And then I think about our contemporary, our situation where it seems like hope has been lost for so many. And people aren't oriented anymore by that noble vision of seeing where God is at work to bring justice. I mean, so many people just seem to have lost hope in the dream, hope in the United States, hope in the church, hope in their own situation. So that's the first thing that strikes me is how do we recover hope? How do we raise that as an orienting vision again?
Yeah, when I think about your question, Kemp, of like, do I see that work alive today? I do see that work alive today. I think it's incomplete. And I don't think anybody would really disagree with that statement. I also, though, look back when I think about where, so to say, where things started with Dr. King and where we are today, where we started with police dogs and a refusal to integrate schools and fire hoses and rampant bigotry and hatred, lack of integration. And then you move that forward to today, you see a change, you see victories, you see not all complete, obviously, but you see some powerful things. I think you also see a generational shift of young people that would think differently. If a young person would have been open and free with racism and communicating that, 60 years ago, that young person would be shamed and ostracized and corrected if they spoke in those same ways today. And they would be that from their own generation, and what they would look at. So I see an impact. I see a difference. I really agree with Dr. Hawk about the idea of hope. And then you still see the injustices. You still see the lack of freedom. You still see a lack of love. It's not. Dr. King's work in some ways is never going to be complete because the human heart is always wicked. And so when I think about him and I think about the power of how God used him, one of the there's a bunch, like we're going to talk for a while and we could talk for years, but one of the things that jumps to my mind is that he was a prophetic voice that called us to biblical truth and to a higher way of loving and living. And that prophetic voice is in some ways missing, in our culture today. And I think that's what we feel sometimes. You're not going to find it in politics. The church has a different standing than it used to, if people will ever even use their voice that they might or might not have in the church. And so I know Dr. King was not sinless. He is not Jesus. But he called us to something higher, and he did it with a motive that had a purity to it. And he ultimately gave his life for what he believed in. And so that stature is why we remember him and celebrate his teaching. And it's probably in some ways the void that we feel in our culture, which is it doesn't erase or eradicate his dream, but it probably doesn't have the momentum, so to say, that it would have if there was another person that would carry that forward. So his impact is clear, and his calling was clear and correct, and we're not there yet, and there's some tangible, powerful things that we can do to continue to love and bring justice and bring freedom. And then there's just especially in a ministry circle, there's the ongoing deceptiveness and deceit and wickedness of the human heart that has to be addressed again and again and again through some of these contexts that he was talking about.
I like both what both of you are saying, and a key word kind of jumped out to me in both of you. Dr. Hawk said Christian, Pastor Jeff said prophetic. One of the things that I think is often missed is that Dr. King became such a national voice that it gets overlooked that he was a Black Baptist preacher, that we lose the context of where he came from and what were the foundations out of which some of the things that he spoke, where they came from. And as they grew and he became a national voice and whatever, it became more political, more cultural, more of other things, but the foundation was always from a Christian perspective, from a biblical, Black biblical perspective of hope and love and charity. Nonviolence, I think, is something that we really need to talk about, because I think we live in such a violent society, and Christianity in a sense has become violent, and yet I don't see the Bible that way. Even though it contains violence. So that's another whole thing. I think we also ought to talk about what the FBI did to him, smear campaigns, those kind of things, because sometimes we think that people who are used by God are perfect or don't have any sins or whatever. And if that were the case, then we could stop having the broadcast and clear the slate and move on, because we all have clay feet. We all have our issues. That's just something to be noted.
Yeah, we would lose every Sunday school lesson ever taught if the standard was sinless. David, Daniel, like on and on and on and on. And that's what I mean. Like, Dr. King was a human being, but he was used in a powerful way. And like, the reason that I would even bring that up is to say, like, if you would let his message be discounted because of his human frailty, then that's literally not the way the Bible works, and so some of that smearing, some of those accusations, some of it's absolutely rampantly false, and then some of it is he's a human being, and he didn't claim to be Jesus Christ, but he did proclaim a message that Jesus proclaimed, and honoring that prophet, so to say, is maybe the way that I would say it, like we would honor a King David or the Apostle Peter or others who, their struggles are documented in the scripture, is not out of place and should not be, we shouldn't allow anything he was teaching to be discounted because of his humanity. But I think there's something about And I'm not teasing you right now, Bishop, but you're older than I am, and so are you, Dr. Hawk. Like you guys, I mean, I'm assuming you don't look like you've held up well, but I don't. There's something about our culture today that you're afraid to be prophetic because you're going to be attacked on social media and all those kind of things. I wonder, like, how you would remember that or see that differently on a generational level. Was he a voice that we're not going to see again because of those things, or was what somebody would risk today, is that just a different version of what he risked, years ago?
Well, I mean, that's a great question, and it raises another question for me, and I appreciate Bishop setting this all in context. He was a local Baptist preacher, and not only that, the people who embraced his vision and program of nonviolent resistance were just ordinary people, but they were willing to pay the price. And nonviolent resistance against principalities and powers is going to require a price, and I think he was willing to pay that price. And I think it's in his book Strength to Love, where he talks about the death threats that his family was receiving, and he knew that they were legitimate because of all the things that had happened, the bombings and the killings and so on and so forth. And he's sitting there at his kitchen table one night, and he just has to decide, am I going to do this? Is this something that I have this strength in me to do? And he did. And the people who were with him, they paid the price. At Edmund Pettus Bridge, all these myriad ways, many of which we'll never know. But that's my question. I mean, is Pastor, to your comment, I mean, are we really willing to pay the price today to continue this program of resistance against principalities and powers that are still well in place? White supremacy is still intact mainly. So the work is not done. But it's going to take perseverance, and it's going to take it's going to call from us a price. And I just wonder, where folks are in this with regard to that question. I mean,
so before we get to that question, Dr. Hawk, what I want to do right now, I want to define nonviolence, because, and I say this, and I'm going to go to you, Bishop, because we've been in countless meetings together where when everything happened in our city, almost 2 years ago now, in the summer with Jayland Walker, there were groups that, and I remember you specifically being in the meeting and say, hey, man, this is where I'm going to sit and stand, because there was a great call from the Black community, right? There was a great call from the Black community. There was anger, there's frustration, there was hurt, there was these things. But I remember, Bishop, being in this meeting, and, you just stood on like, hey, man, like here, as for me and my house, we going to stand on nonviolence. But what I appreciate what you did, though, Bishop, is you defined what that meant and what that looks like. So if you could just do that for us and for our audience, I think it's going to be good. And then we'll come back to your question, Dr. Hawk.
Brother Kemp, you have put me in a bad position, brother. I don't know how we have defined it. I'm going to try to define it today, but I'm going to say that any definition of violence or nonviolence is very complicated because it has so many facets to it. But I would start out by saying that I believe that when you start to read the text of the Word of God, it comes up very rapidly that all of the earth and the world was violent. And as you move through and you come to Jesus, you have to see that he's nonviolent. He's not responding in kind, like for like. And so I would, to start out, I would define violence as a intent or an act to harm somebody else. That's how I'd start it. And then when you think about that, I don't see Jesus responding from the cross with an intent or an act to harm other people out of what's going on. But Dr. Hawk started something, so I got to touch it, and then he can pick it back up. The word I'm using right now and the word I'm dealing with is apathy. That America has become so apathetic, so numb to pain and not wanting to suffer, and the triumphal gospel, the wanting to have success or whatever, that I'm not sure we know that there's any, or we're willing to pay the price, or we know that there is a price because we're trying to get away from pain. And so we want to get away from pain, and that stops us from doing things where pain is involved.
Man, I don't think it's ever been this quiet on the podcast.
You're thinking about that pain.
Right.
I thought the video froze. I was waiting for it to come back on.
Dr. Hawk, you had something on your mind. I saw it.
Well, I was just thinking as well. I mean, apathy. I mean, I hear folks saying that we, justifying the apathy in a way, or explaining the apathy by saying, well, we're in a post-racial society. We've pretty much, dealt with the big structural issues, involving racism in the United States, and we're kind of moving past that. And I'm just wondering if you've all heard the same thing, or whether that plays in, or how you respond to those comments. I mean,
I don't think we're in a post-racial society. I probably, I don't know if I think I would say the opposite, but it seems like we're having more conversations about race, and some of them healthy, some of them wildly unhealthy, than I don't know if it's than ever or not, but it's certainly not a mute topic. What I see in a generation younger than me, so like my children's generation, is I see different races who would take offense at racism. And even when I was in high school 40 years ago, I heard tons of racial comments, racial jokes, racial insults. It was common for the world that I lived in for that to be a part of things. Today, at least with my children, if that happened, there would be great offense and great correction taken. So to call someone a racist would be one of the most insulting things or strong things that you could label someone. So I don't think we're in a post-racial society. I do think that, and this is what I'm trying to ask a little bit, like when Dr. King made his statement or laid out the truth years ago, it was often rejected by churches, by leaders, by communities, by a generation.
Absolutely.
When that same truth is spelled out today, I don't think it's universally accepted, but I think it's to a greater degree embraced, where like my children would hear that truth and say, we actually agree with Dr. King. Who is that weird guy that wouldn't let the black kids go to high school? That's ridiculous. Like, see, so there's a shift there. I know with my children, I could tell you stories, but I won't. But like, if they had an African-American friend who was called a racial epithet, that actually happened. Like my son hit the guy who insulted his friend. So there's a difference. There's like that is unjust, that is wrong, that is sinful. I'm not sure that was the case in the 50s and the 60s on a broad cultural level. But I do not believe that racial issues have gone away or that they don't influence us. And I do believe, we've talked a lot on this podcast, that you can even uncover them in yourself in ways that just because somebody pushed back on you or helped you to think through an issue that you didn't know was there. And we've talked a lot about, is that racism? Is that, et cetera, et cetera. But those conversations, I think, are very much alive. And like I said, some are healthy and some are wildly unhealthy. But I don't believe that we live in a post-racial society.
On one of the Star Trek episodes, forgive me, a quote was made, if we are to see a brave new world, our generation is probably going to have the hardest time living in it.
Yeah.
It is the generation, my generation, the generation of Dr. Martin Luther King, still around, that's probably still having a problem. There are youth who probably grew up in situations where they just normally interacted with folks of a different ethnic background, and they take it for granted. Therefore, they don't understand, they don't know the history, don't understand some of the things that are going on there. But it wouldn't be out of malice, it would be out of ignorance. But yet, there's a whole generation of folks who are still suffering from coming through that era, coming through what went on, and still unable to break out of the cultural shackles that went on and what took place there. So I think that's very powerful. And I think when we start talking about this, we have the platform to talk about the fact that even though there would be any number of people who would agree with Dr. King, I don't know if they'd be willing to pay the price of pain.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. And the two things I would say, one is an example. I was watching football with my couple of my kids the other day, the NFL, and both of the quarterbacks are African American. And I don't really remember how the conversation came up, but I basically said, I remember when the first African American quarterback played. Like, I'm 52. I remember when that happened on a significant level. Doug Williams won the Super Bowl, all those kind of things. And my son looked at me, he goes, why wouldn't there be any black quarterbacks? And I said, because the belief was they didn't have the intelligence to play quarterback. And my son's reaction, he literally goes, what? Like that reaction was not my generation's reaction. So my son was like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I'm like, you're right. But that was one generation ago. The generation before me is Jackie Robinson and African Americans coming into Major League Sports for the first time. So for some in that third generation, Dr. King's thinking and his beliefs are their norms, which I think is a powerful thing. Now, for some, obviously it's not, but it's their norms. And that's why, because they don't think having a black quarterback is weird. That's actually why we're able to talk about bigger societal issues with them. You can go to like a different level now with them because that like level one has been, I don't want to say it's been conquered, but it's been addressed, I guess. Right. I'm not sure what word to use there. This idea of paying the price, though, I see that. I actually would look back to what you were saying, Joey, about being a pastor. And just a pastor having the courage to say in a culture that hated that particular truth,
Absolutely.
what that truth was.
Absolutely.
And wasn't afraid about church growth and wasn't afraid about the other pastors in the community hating his guts, etc. But that's the prophet in Dr. King, where he's, this is what the book says, and I'm going to preach this from my pulpit.
Yeah. I want Dr. Hawk to comment on this, but I think this is one of the problems when we lose history. When we don't have history, we don't have a context of what has taken place, then where we stand seems to be justified, but it doesn't have a real solid base to it. I believe it was Eugene Peterson who said that sometimes when we're discussing the Bible, we're coming to a conversation at 5 till 12 midnight that started at 8 a.m. in the morning, and thinking that we are up to date. So what happens is we start having these conversations. This is why this conversation is so critical, but we don't know the history of what took place.
Yeah.
So we don't have a full context of all this going on. Dr. Hawk, can you say something to that?
Well, sure. I can agree with it wholeheartedly. This idea that this historical context and this moment as a part of a long historical struggle is something that we need to pay attention to, not only to help us to get a sense of where we have advanced in particular areas, but also to get a sense of how much remains undone that was part of that original vision. And frankly, part of me wonders in the present social and political climate whether it's not so much whether it's the past is beginning to repeat itself. And I'm just thinking about the rise in violence and hate and just all of the ways that somehow in the last 6 to 8 years or so, things that had been long suppressed in terms of attitudes, that we just see them coming to the surface again. We hear people utilizing racist dog whistles to encourage support. I mean, my goodness, we have a presidential candidate who was asked about the cause of the Civil War and couldn't reference slavery. I mean, so that tells me that there's it's concerning. We can learn from history, but and we can be inspired by resistance, which I think is the key term here. And I think that's, you can't talk about a prophet without talking about resistance and challenging the powers that are in play. But and history gives us a sense of how that worked, how that developed, but it also, for me, just gives us a context for saying this work is not over. And there is I feel a sense of urgency in this time to say this, resistance needs to find a way to push back, or we're gonna devolve into the kind of tribalism that King, really himself resisted and spoke to in terms of his analysis of American culture and society.
Thanks, Dr. King. I wanted you, Dr. Hawk, I wanted you to say something.
Hold on 1 second, Bishop. Pastor Jeff, you had a thought. I don't want you to lose that.
I had a question. So
okay.
I can ask it or I can wait, either way.
You can ask it. Okay.
My question, I think, and this is a genuine question, is from the 50s to the 60s, to 2024, the country as a whole has moved so far away from, I'll call it, basic biblical values or basic information. So when Dr. King, as a national leader, spoke on love or equality, there was, so to say, a biblical foundation that could bring conviction to that. How do you, and maybe this is you, Daniel, or Joe, I don't, either one of you, but how do you guys think speaking that truth, like Dr. Hawk, when you're talking about the tribalism and the dog whistles on both sides of the political aisle, etc., how do you think this shift in people's adherence to biblical truth has affected so much, even the ability to draw clarity or conviction with speaking Jesus's truth to a society now that doesn't seem like they care about it much? How has that changed?
I don't think there's any doubt, and I've had to share this on any number of occasions, that the cultural ethos in which Dr. King spoke is vastly different from the cultural ethos of today. So you can't just walk in and use the same principles that King used and expect to get the same response, because it doesn't exist anymore. That cultural ethos is not there. So we have to find a different starting point to probably inculcate the same values. I don't think those values change, but the cultural ethos certainly has changed drastically.
Yeah, I think, Bishop, one of the things that you mentioned earlier about the beloved community, that's where for me, the King was putting that before the church first. I mean, we need to exemplify this community in which everyone has value, everyone belongs, everyone has dignity, everybody has freedom. We need that's our soul force. I mean, that's, love is our force. But on the other hand, I think to the general society, I mean, I see King really pushing this nation to observe the principles that it says form this country and that we live by. He was calling the nation to fidelity with its own vision of who that nation was. So I see that in two ways. I mean, the love and the Christian witness comes out of the church, which becomes the prominent means of this resistance, but it's also a message to the culture that we are not living up to who we say we are and how we say to our ideals.
Dr. King, Dr. Hall, I'm going to call him Dr. King. We're going to run out of time, I know, but what you're saying, I want to say in a different way, and I think we should pick it up in the future. Dr. King spoke as the soul of America, the conscience, but he did so from the place of the church. The answer, I believe, Brother Jeff, is what we are doing right here, creating a dialogue for people to see how different people with different perspectives can come to love one another and respect one another as an example for where the world needs to go. We don't have any other examples. Who are our examples? I mean, what would be, if the church can't produce this, if we can't pull it off, if we are going to be as strident, as bitter, as angry as the world, then I don't know where our hope is.
I had a conversation the other day that really convicted me. I was talking to a friend about racial equality and about justice and being a Christ follower and all those kind of things. And he personally would be very committed to those things. But he said something to me interesting. He said, what are the most integrated parts of our society? And I go, you tell me. He said, it's sports, the military, and the police and fire and like civil things. He goes, so what's the most segregated part of our society? And I said, the church. He goes, so why is the most segregated part of our society telling the most integrated part of our society how they should do it better? And I was like, oh, I hate it. I hate the fact that he's right about that. Right. I hate the fact that, and what he was saying, he's a strong Christ follower and all the rest. He wasn't trying to be a jerk. What he was saying was what you just said, Bishop. He's like, if you guys can't do it, why do you think that we should be able to do it? We're actually doing it better than you're doing it.
Next time, let's talk about that, because I don't think they are doing it better. I think they're doing it worse. But I think that they are, for the sake of money, for the sake of success, for the sake, we are willing to hide what we really feel, rather than in the church where we don't have those kind of motives. The motives have to be more pure.
Yeah, I think he would say, like, when you get into, bring it out of like pro sports, you get into high school, college kind of thing, that there's real friendships there, police officers who really would lay their life down for their partner, firefighter, etc. And like a lot of the I know you, I love you, I invest my life in you. And it's that, 75% of white people don't have a relationship with a person of color. He's like, well, that's not true. I work that way. That's my partner. Those are my friends that I hang out with, etc. And I just found it convicting.
Yeah,
that I'm like, we need to do a better job, and he was kind of looking at saying, careful, you have the word of God, which he adheres to very strongly. But he's like, in your practice and in your example, you don't actually have a moral high ground on it, because there's not nearly enough of what we're trying to do here happening. And he's there's some truth in it.
Brother Kemp's gonna cut us off, so I got to tell one story, Brother Kemp. Can you allow me to do that?
I would absolutely.
I know you're the moderator. I know you're the moderator. I spoke back in 2016, I think it was. Where then it was I can't remember what his role was for the state, but anyway, I spoke. We had a gathering of police, 600 police, and I happened to be doing the civil rights thing and looking at all that stuff, and he asked me to speak to these 600 police officers, and I'm going to say it was the worst environment I've ever been in my life. Nobody would respond. Nobody would laugh. Nobody would do anything. And I was like, what in the world have I gotten myself into? But afterwards, one by one, the police came up to me and said, that was incredible. That was good. And I asked them, so why didn't you respond? And here's what came out. Because if I let them know what I believe, if I let my fellow officers know what I believe, and I am in a life or death situation, I could be putting my life on the line by adhering to certain principles. So I don't let them know. I just act neutral for a lot of it. So I'm saying that's just one example. There are probably many where it seems like everything is okay and they're working it out, but it may not. That may be on the surface. It may not be underneath.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure I think that stuff is real, and I'm sure there's examples of deep friendships and deep loyalty too.
Absolutely.
I think what struck me is that if that's the case within the church, right? And this is a brother or sister in Christ. There's a unity in Christ, and it saddens me that what I would feel or think on the outside or present on the outside is not what's actually driving me on the inside. And for Christ followers to not wrestle through rectifying those two positions is deep. And my friend I was talking to is definitely a Christ follower. And I think that's what he was trying to say is he's like, I work every day with people that I love and will give my life to. You don't, we wrestle with this, even if there's tension in it, we're wrestling with it. We're living this. The church doesn't do that. The black church goes to the black church, the white church goes to the white church, kind of thing. And I'm like, it's for me, I think, Bishop, what you said is just convicting. Like if we won't work on it and we won't prioritize it, who will? And I think that I wonder, I don't know if you can have a declining church and an inclining culture. And so I'm like, is the weakness of the church culturally apathetic, all the above, is the weakness of the church directly tied to the weakness of the culture. And if Dr. King was alive today and kind of making his run, so to say, right now, is there an underlying authority or even an underlining, like I don't know that our culture agrees with the constitutional ideas that we were built on anymore.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so it's so like when you talk about, and I know we're out of time, so maybe this has to be next time, Kemp, but like Bishop, when you talk about we have to come at a new starting point, I'm like, figuring that out would be a phenomenal conversation. Like what is that starting point? Where do you begin it?
Yeah, I think that's what we need to do. And I think there's another element that Kemp's going to write down for us for next time. And that is often when we have this discussion, because of the way that we frame it, we don't talk about the demonic element that we are dealing with. So yes, the church has a lot of issues, but we have a demonic resistance to the church moving forward that the world doesn't have.
Yeah.
So the devil's not trying to stop the world. Or sometimes people will come to me and they'll say, we were at the bar last night and man, we had a great time. And I said, well, of course. Then I come to church, I can't get along with it. I said, I don't think the devil is trying to stop you at the bar. But he is in church.
Yeah.
So, man, again, this is great. I am your bookend moderator. I get the first word and the last one. And that's it. Everything in between, all the good cream in the middle, the meat in the middle is coming from Dr. Hawk, Pastor Jeff, and Bishop Johnson. Thank you all so much for your time today, for your wisdom, your sageness, all things that happen. And I want to get back to something that was said at the very beginning was about the beloved community. And it's described like this: a caring and compassionate drive politically to draw political policies that support a worldwide elimination of poverty and hunger and all forms of bigotry and violence. That is the beloved community. And a short, just brief description. We'll venture back into the beloved community and other topics that we'll mention today on the next episode of The Intersection. Thank you so much for being with us. You can follow us on all the different social media platforms. And we encourage you to do so. And if you have any questions for us, please reach out at us at The Intersection at loveakron.org. That's The Intersection at loveakron.org. Thank you all again for your time, for your wisdom. And we say we'll see you next time and we'll meet you at The Intersection. Thank you so much.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode of The Intersection, where we look at how everything intersects and brings us all back to Jesus. You can subscribe and follow us on Apple, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, and YouTube. And we'll see you next time at The Intersection.